I believe that is just a universal pest. These dumb fucks who show up at a protest, and I do think you're right. I don't think they give half of a shit about what the protest is about. They
Definitely
just
not.
want to break stuff. I was at a protest for DC statehood, and there were these motherfuckers in the back, like picking up trash cans and like trying to get this is a while ago, newspaper boxes unchained from the light post. It's motherfucker. What does that have to do with anything?
What does that have to do with state sovereignty? There is a distinctly French flavor about this, because in America you've got your fiery but mostly peaceful protests. It's not like Americans don't know how to do a riot.
God help us, we are going to talk about Donald Trump.
He's just committed so many crimes. Like, obviously, it's coming down to paying hush money to an adult performer.
Well, thank you for putting the image of naked Donald Trump in all of our heads, Thomas.
You already had that.
I hope.
We're back to wondering whether, it's better or worse to have Trump or DeSantis. Racists love to have non-white partners, apparently, and children. I'm still wrapping my head around this.
We call people racist too much. We just do it at the drop of a hat. She popped up to call you and Yasha Monk unfuckable. Am I interpreting that right? Good luck with your weird sex life. Have fun, Professor.
Hi, I'm Thomas Chatterton Williams.
And I'm Jeff Chatterton Maurer.
I'm a writer.
And I'm a comedian.
And we host a podcast called Wrongthink, more of a question than a comment.
In addition to being more of a question than a comment, it is also more of a podcast we want people to know about than just two guys talking into a microphone for no reason.
So we'd like to ask you to please subscribe to the show.
If you like the show, please share it with your friends. If you don't like the show, then please punish your enemies by sharing it with them.
And also please rate us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Grindr, we got a lot of listeners on Grindr. The Wrongthink podcast. Thinking, except bad. Thomas Chatterton Williams. Can I call you Thomas Chatville de Guillaume?
Oh, you're getting closer.
I worked on that all week. Because you are sometimes French. So I thought I would hew towards the French pronunciation of your name. Is that, I even replaced ton with ville, as they do.
I just caught that. That was a grenade joke right there.
Chatville.
Chatville. I like it. I can dig it.
Okay, well, I'm not sure how I feel about it if you like it, so I'm not going to use it. TC Dubs, how's it going this week? You having a good week?
TC Guillaume's, T Dubs. I'm having a good
TCG.
week. TCG.
TC to G. What's up? Good week?
Good week. Strange week. I'm in Paris this week with my children, and there's a bit of rioting going on, a bit of protesting going on, some mayhem in the streets. It's deeply Parisian right now, but it's a kind of Paris that I don't think it's my favorite side of Paris.
Okay, would you say there's more protesting and rioting than usual in Paris?
Yes. Yeah, it's nothing that we haven't seen before, but it's more than usual. For one real quality of life example, there are a lot of nationwide protests going on and strikes, but one of the strikes that you really feel is the garbage strike. And so in certain parts of Paris, certain arrondissements, there's private garbage pickup. And in certain arrondissements, like where I live, it's city dependent. And I think it's a public health hazard at this point. I mean, the garbage is stacking up in the streets to where it's hitting up the second floor window, of buildings. It's crazy. There are rats.
And how high is the garbage in Paris normally? Can you
normally it's like waist high
or meters, I suppose.
Normally
Did you say waist high?
Like 1 or 2 meters. This is like 5 or 6 meters, maybe. This is crazy.
Okay, so bad times. Well, we're going to talk about France. This is going to be a very French heavy episode. But first, I want to talk about something that does not matter whatsoever. Is that okay?
Why not? It's your podcast.
It's
half yours,
but it's half mine. So today I get to complain about nothing. What I want to complain about is a guy on Twitter said Meg White wasn't a good drummer. Meg White from the White Stripes. He said Meg White was not a good drummer. and Twitter freaked the fuck out. Jack White posted a poem on his Instagram, in my opinion, the least persuasive form of persuasion, a poem on Instagram. But he posted a poem on Instagram defending Meg White's drumming. A lot of people came out of the woodwork saying, no, she's a great drummer. She's fantastic. Even though, okay, I don't know how much you know about drumming. I play the drums a bit. She's not. She's just kind of not. And a lot of people made the argument, it's not about, virtuosity and, how quickly you can play in all your fills and things, which I completely agree with. It is, sometimes less is more.
Sometimes it's just about your
even
swag.
According to that metric, she's just not that great. And I thought, when I read this, I thought about how many times I have made jokes about Ringo Starr. Jokes where I have written dozens, if not hundreds, of jokes about Ringo Starr, where the upside of the joke is always that, like, Ringo was lucky to be there, right? Which is the take that everyone agrees on with the Beatles.
Yeah.
I have never gotten nobody ever cares when I write, several of them have gotten on TV, a few ended up on my blog. Nobody cares when I write jokes about Ringo. This defense of Meg White, it was so gendered, like people were obviously sometimes doing it because she's one of the very few female drummers.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, you can't say that about her. I just thought it was unbelievably condescending. Shouldn't you just treat her the same way as any other
But then
artist?
you would have equality. That would be actually looking for equality, which is not the E word that we look for.
Not
but
trendy.
Wait, who played the drums on Seven Nation Army? Because those went kind of hard.
Meg White played it. Meg White played on every White.
I don't know. I'm not as deep in the game as you are, but those drums banged. No,
I would disagree. I would respectfully disagree. But this is exactly the type of debate you can have about a piece of music, and it's got to be okay, right, to say that I don't think the drums were that good. They're
got to
fine.
be able to say that.
They're fine.
You've got to be able to say that. I mean, if certain people can't be criticized, then you can't actually have an honest debate about equality. I mean, you're making a joke, but it's actually a serious point. I mean, it's one of the things that drives John McWhorter, Glenn Lowry, a lot of people that have been commenting on the kind of racial condescension that happens when you can't judge a non-white writer by the same standards that you would want to judge a white writer by, for one instance. I mean, it's actually not the type of defense that you ever want to have come when your work is being critiqued.
I would think it would be humiliating.
Yeah.
I would be devastated if I was her in this instance. And I don't want to say that everyone who says, oh, she's a good drummer was, doing it because she's a woman. I know that a lot of people just have that opinion. That's fine. But yes, I would find it devastating
right now, because she's been in the game for a long time. What sparked this debate right now?
Just some guy on Twitter who apologized.
What sparks everything nowadays, right?
Yeah.
Just guy on Twitter.
Just a guy on Twitter.
Yeah.
And it also should be noted, the guy just tweeted out an opinion. You got to be able to have an opinion about a piece of music, right? He didn't buy 30 seconds during the Super Bowl. He didn't publish an article in the New York Times. It was just an opinion on Twitter.
Yeah, you can't have an opinion on Twitter these days, though.
Yeah, I guess. All right, should we talk about stuff that matters?
Well, music matters, but I'm down to change it up.
Okay, let's talk about stuff that matters arguably more than the drumming in mid-2000s rock songs. We are going to talk about what they're doing in Florida to curtail campus speech. That's all they do in Florida these days, is curtail campus speech and host the World Baseball Classic, it seems. Those two things. We're going to talk about a professor who is eccentric even by the standards of a philosophy professor. God help us, we are going to talk about Donald Trump because we can't avoid it. But first, let's talk about France. Thomas, you're French sometimes. Are you French right now?
I'm at the moment I'm French. I won't be come Friday, but right now I am.
Très bien. So you're in Paris, covered in trash. There are
trash up to the windows.
more trash than average, and more rioting than average. Can you please tell us about the riots? What are they, and what are they about?
There's a very specifically French way of rioting and protesting, and certainly not all, just like in the American context, not all protesters are rioters by any means. But whenever there's some protests going on, there's some rioting and some what the French call like these people are called casseurs, like breakers. They're just guys, mostly guys, who show up whenever some political manifestation is going on. And they're not just even there necessarily to take the iPhone. Sometimes they'll break into an Apple store or something that at least makes sense. But most of the time, they just want to actually ruin things. They want to, for example, in a way that most American riots don't actually devolve. Anytime some protests are going on in France, like vehicles burn. Like just outside my house, like the last time, like straight up, like just a motorcycle set on fire on the block and it melds into the curb. It's like a nasty, gnarly thing that happens. But what they also do is they light like these big plastic garbage bins on fire, and that burns in the most toxic way, and it melts into the street as well. And the garbage is on fire, and it's just really unpleasant. So, there were no fires in my street. There have been fires around, but in my street on Tuesday night, not so long after Macron pushed through his bill raising the retirement age from 62 to 64, and then surviving a no confidence motion in the House of Representatives, the equivalent of the House of Representatives. There was kind of like a lot of commotion in the streets, and I looked out my window around 10:30 or 11 on Tuesday night, and there were like 20 to 30 guys, mostly in black, dressed in black hoodies and stuff, throwing every single towering pile of trash into the main thoroughfare out there. I mean, it was actually, it was insane. And then as soon as they get down the block and the whole street is covered with refuse, then like, I would say like 15 to 20 paddy wagons came screeching down the street and swerving, almost crashing, because there's so much garbage, lamps, mattresses, all this thrown in the middle of the street. Uber Eats, Deliveroo, brothers on bicycles are damn near falling, damn near spilling their deliveries. Random people trying to get home, like riding their bikes, are having trouble. I mean, they're massive mayhem in the street. And then, the image that really capped it off for me is, because on the one hand, this is politically motivated. We're trying to be supportive of people's right to protest, a kind of change in their expectations of when they can retire, that, that's a very serious thing. But at the end of the day, the image that I see is an old woman when all of the police have gone by. No, not a single police stopped to get out of the car and move any of the garbage. The casseurs have made their way through, and they're onto another block, screaming, laughing. It sounds like a party. And just one lone old woman with her dog ends up walking into traffic and slowly pulling the bins back and trying to pull a broken lamp out of the way of some bicycle lane. And that's
what a haunting image, worthy of classic French cinema. It's almost as if you spotted a young lad chasing a red balloon among the wreckage, so as to personify how humanity continues even amidst chaos.
Yeah.
Did you by chance film that in black and white? In which case you could score it to some accordion music and submit it to Cannes and probably win.
I'm coming for the Palme d'Or next year.
So, sounds like a magical city, by the way, and I can understand why people want to pay top dollar to live there and be amongst the trash and the rioting. I gotta say, those fuckers who just show up and break things. Those I believe that is just a universal pest. These dumb fucks who show up at a protest, and I do think you're right. I don't think they give half of a shit about what the protest is about. They
definitely
just want to break stuff. They're just looking for a bit of cover so they can break stuff. I remember, this is like 20 years ago, but I was at a protest for DC statehood. And there were these motherfuckers in the back, like picking up trash cans and like trying to get this is a while ago, newspaper boxes unchained from the light posts. It's motherfucker. What does that have to do with anything?
What does that have to do with state sovereignty?
Yes. Nothing. It's just there was a crowd there. And they're just sitting in between protests. They're just sitting at home going, oh, I can't wait until I can throw a trash can through a Starbucks window.
And these are some of the laziest no count fools
Yes.
in the society, but
No,
somehow
no
they
count.
no
Big,
count.
big words.
But somehow they've got Google alerts or something whenever there's a protest happening. They're there they're there ASAP.
Yeah.
They're there before I know there's a protest going on and I'm reading the news. I mean, they're always out when it's time to break something. There is a distinctly French flavor about this, because in America you've got your fiery but mostly peaceful protests. It's not like Americans don't know how to do a riot, but the French are a little bit different. Americans have guns. It can go sideways really severely in America. Doesn't quite do that in France, but it stays at this level of hostility and animosity and kind of just nastiness, malevolence, where it's just like, I'm not going to shoot you. I don't even have the means to shoot you, but I will light 20 cars on fire on this block, and I'll just make this neighborhood miserable. I'll break every window.
Sounds chic the way they're doing it. Sounds chic and refined. As an American, I feel I'm intrigued. Sounds very shishi the way they're doing it. But let's talk a little bit about what they are protesting about, or at least since we've kind of separated the protesters.
What the protesters are actually protesting
rioters,
about.
What the actual protesters are upset about is
a tweet. They're upset about a tweet.
Well, besides the Meg White tweet, they're surely up in arms about that. They are also protesting the president raising the retirement age to 29? Is it now in France? What did you say they raised it to?
Oh man,
26.
It's. I'll tell you this. It's an age that feels, now that I'm in my 40s, it feels a little bit young. I mean, I think that there's a kind of national, and you can national characteristics or descriptors only go so far, but there's a national kind of approach to the idea of work that is distinctly French and would be very different from their neighbors just across the channel in the United Kingdom, different than their neighbors just over the border in Germany, different than their cousins and brothers and sisters in Belgium. They have a very distinctly French way of thinking about work-life balance. Some of it is actually, kind of amazing. When I first moved to France in 2011, I was young, married guy, stressed about, being an immigrant. How do I, work enough? And March would come around the first year, and it was like all of the people that would start sending these emails and text messages like, okay, it's time to find the house for August that we'll rent. Who's in? It's like, what is this? March? Like, I've got rent to pay. I don't know what you're talking about. August. And it's like, yeah, you have to plan your August or all of the houses will be gone because we take August off, and it took me 2 or 3 summers to allow myself to get into that. And once I did, I was like, this is amazing. This actually, if you actually just fully embrace that level of work-life balance, it can do a lot of wonders for you. Americans are overworked and they do work too long. My dad hasn't even admitted to himself that he's retired at 85. My mom only retired at 75, and she was happy going to work. I mean, I think we can have a bigger discussion about what capitalism does to people and how people buy into, their own exploitation. But, she liked having a place to go. She liked being useful. It's very different in France.
Let's talk about work-life balance, because it's not just a general sense of how things are in France. They were, I was joking, obviously, about 29. They were trying to raise, and they did, Macron did, raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. In most of Europe, it is 65. Right. So they are still 1 year earlier than most of Europe. But a lot of the unrest about this in France, and this move is unpopular. It's an unpopular move. Macron could not get Parliament to back him. It looked like they were going to, but then they didn't. So he had to use I don't want to say seldom used because he's been using it somewhat frequently, but a clause in the Constitution that allows him to legally pass a law by fiat. Seems awfully dicey. Americans have executive orders, so maybe we shouldn't be too critical. But the upshot is the age of retirement has gone up by 2 years in France. The work-life balance for the nation has changed. And this brings us straight into our Who is Thomas Fighting With on Twitter this week segment.
It all lines
Because
up. It always lines up.
it's easy to line any topic up with a fight you're getting on Twitter, Thomas. So why don't you tell us about the fight you got in this week?
So, it's going back to what I was talking about with this, this slow acclimation process I've had over the past 12 years in France with my American sensibilities, getting used to people having vastly different views about work and, the separation of one's sense of self within the workplace and one sense of self in the wider life. I think Americans are much more or much less compartmentalized, maybe I'd say. So, I kind of, without thinking it through very much because it's Twitter, it's not an essay. I tweeted, thinking of, some of the office workers I know, parents of friends I have who, retired at 60, the moment they turned 60, they typically would expect 75% of their salary for life at that point in the form of a pension. And these are people that, some of them will live to be 90, some of them will live to be 95. There are friends' grandparents I know who are in that situation. It's strange to think that someone worked for 35 years and then will collect 35 years of 75% of their salary for the 35 years that they worked. So I'm thinking of that, and I tweet, this typically French desire to retire as soon as possible and then spend the next decade or 2 or 3 decades finally really doing what you want to do never made sense to me, because work, my work is foundational to my sense of self. I assume that, and I just hope that in this age of, AI innovation, there will still be work to do for most of us. That's what I'm more worried about than rushing to retire in what seems like a really close amount of time, 20 years.
I can see why people jumped down your throat about this, because you
it was short-sighted.
You write for the Atlantic, and you're a philosophy professor. If I used to be a temp. I used to work at Wendy's. I worked at a video store because I'm a million years old. That's like saying I drove a steamboat at this day and age. But there are some jobs you work just to work, and when you hit the point where you're allowed to not do it anymore and you have enough money, you go, hooray, and then you lay on the couch until you die, basically. But that's
but it might be quite a long time. No, I feel you. And that was so, when whatever account picked up on it that wanted to, use the tweet as a talking point for how out of touch, me specifically or writers in general or whatever the issue was, using the tweet to make a statement about how working class people are not even taken into account, well, that's true. When I think about, manual labor, certain types of jobs that are really taxing on the body, or just that usually have employees beginning in, their teens even, retiring at 62 is not crazy. And actually, to be fair, Macron, of course, there are all types of provisions in the law that account for people that work in the railways and different types of professions that do still get that special consideration to retire early. So it's not as though everybody is having their situation changed. And in France, to be fair to Macron as well, you have always had these kind of provisions for certain types of work that were put in place 100 years ago, when you might work on the SNCF on the railroad, and you would retire at 52. I believe was the age. Sweet. Yeah, and with full pension, but you might not expect to make it to 60. And so you have a society now where...
when was that put in place? Because if that was put in place in, in the
20th century,
1888, it's like, who lives to 52? The king, nobody else.
No, it's like 1920s, 30s, these types of...
Not far off.
not far, but life was very different, and the railroad was a very different type of work. But you still have people under those protections being able to get full pension in their 50s.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I think
unsustainable. That's crazy. And also the work isn't nearly as taxing as it was. So, I'm of two minds about this. Macron has a point that, France is an extreme outlier. And I think that, the protesters would say that they agree France is an outlier, and that's something worth, taking the fight to the streets to preserve, because they don't want to be like everybody else.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two questions here. The first is whether work is fundamental to a sense of self. And I think it's just going to depend on the person, isn't it? I think you clearly feel, and I would agree, that work is in some way fundamental to my sense of self. It's hard to imagine not working. Ask me again when I'm 65. I might have a totally different opinion. I might, and I'm of the age that I will play video games my entire life. So I might just say, fuck it. I'm going to, sit on the couch with my PlayStation 12.
You could pay me 75% of my salary to sit on my couch playing video games.
Yeah, that's pretty. I mean, that doesn't sound awful. Doesn't sound awful. So I certainly understand work is not foundational to everyone's sense of self, and that's normal and fine. But then the second question is, how affordable is it to let people retire at a certain age? Now, I'm not French, not even part French like you. I haven't broken down their budget, and I don't want to comment on their politics because they don't need an American commenting on their politics. But there is always the question of, can you afford it? Because, retiring at 62 is nice. It's even better retiring at 61. It's even better retiring at 55 or 30 or 40. Why not just
not even working in the first place?
Why not retire at 25? The answer is because you can't afford that. And I did think you got, of all the people who dragged you on Twitter, and I always set this up like, oh, tell me about your Twitter fight. I know your Twitter fights. I'm lurking in the corner watching your Twitter fights, Thomas.
Them shits are going viral. Unfortunately. Unfortunately.
First of all, it's always because people just don't like you. They are your political opponents, They don't like you because of the Harper's letters. So
you're not going to get good faith. Like, oh, let me read this in the most generous way. But I did. I'll just say it was one of those occasions where I said, getting a lot of pushback on this tweet. Some people are really nasty about it. It's Twitter. That's fine.
Yeah, you don't say.
But a lot of people are actually, saying, really, moving testimony about how, they feel alienated at their work, or, they were working really tough jobs, and that they wish they could be in a society where they could have some respite. And that is something that is to be admired. And, I took that seriously. So I said, it wasn't a somewhat unimaginative tweet, and y'all have changed my mind, and I won't delete it because I think that that's crazy. I'll just leave it up there and I'll take the criticism. But my bad. Y'all are right. Like, touche. I agree.
I'm glad you could find the legitimate point in there amidst the sea of people who just don't like you for other reasons. Because I think you're right. Work is not foundational to everyone's sense of self, and that's fine. A lot of jobs, do you work to live or live to work? I mean, we have an expression about this. But I would like to draw attention to probably the biggest clown who dragged you on Twitter, and that, of course, would be Nathan J. Robinson.
Who?
If you're not familiar with Nathan J. Robinson, listeners, don't bother becoming familiar with Nathan J. Robinson. Your life is just better not knowing about this guy. But I consider him a clown. He wrote an article in Current Affairs in which he quoted you. And this is what Nathan J. Robinson wrote in Current Affairs. They, meaning the French, don't believe that people's lives should be spent toiling until they are near death. They believe long retirements ought to be a right. And they're correct. This mindset drives me insane. It is like the most childlike view of how economies work, how, in this case, pensions work, where you just declare it to be a right. You just say, it's a right. It's a right to retire at 62, end of story. And there's no question of, can you afford that? Where does the money come from? It drives me a little bit nuts when people flatten the issue that badly.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say, but I mean, and then they say that, well, it's just about priorities. You just, the money could come from just raising taxes specifically on wealthy people. But
Can I jump in?
yeah,
France has the highest
they do.
taxes as a percentage of GDP in the entire OECD.
Right. Oh,
The highest, higher than Scandinavia, but continue.
it's not just for wealthy people. It's for, what most Americans would consider like tiers of the middle class, get taxed in a way that, is pretty tough. So it's always easy to say that somebody else should pay more taxes so that you can have that thing that is right or that you want. But now, so in all seriousness, though, I don't know. I mean, salaries in Paris. I mean, Paris is a pretty expensive town these days. The cost of living has gone up quite a lot in this century, rapidly.
Despite the trash and the rioting, yes.
It's not as expensive as New York, but it's really expensive to live in. And teachers at my daughter's public school are pulling down something like 1,800 euros a month. In their 50s, which is actually shocking. They do provide a high quality public education, but you can't live in Paris.
That's not very much.
No. So the urge to kind of protest and fight for a better work-life balance and for just better working conditions in general, like I definitely am sympathetic to that. I think that, there's a kind of culture of striking and of grievance that ends up actually making life kind of difficult for just normal people, just people trying to take their kids to school and be able to plan that they can take a train. So everybody kind of really feels it when people are fighting for their rights. But a lot of French people find that to be like just a sense of solidarity that they wouldn't want to give up as part of their culture. So I don't mean to be too glib and dismiss it, but there's something about this vision of just having a pension for 30 years and nothing to do and no sense of purpose that seems to me kind of terrifying. And, the kind of nasty comments always get the most traction on Twitter, but I was getting messages from people that were, self-identifying as construction workers, blue collar, you name it, office workers, saying that, no, that's a fine way of thinking about things. I hope that I'll be able to work with my hands beyond the age of 62 and I want to, and I don't want to stop working. So, work, it's a key question. Like, who are we? Who are we without work? What does our work do to us? How do we feel about our work? I mean, we're not going to solve that in a podcast, but it's something that it gave me quite a lot of food for thought, because I kind of take for granted that if you're not satisfied through your work, it's going to be very difficult to be satisfied in a lot of other ways. And I guess just an enormous amount of people don't necessarily feel that way. And so, it's always good to confront your own blind spots, right?
Yeah. You perhaps learned a little something this week about how shitty a lot of people's jobs are. My granddad was a construction worker for more than 40 years and retired, and then couldn't stop building stuff.
Right.
And was always just putting an addition onto his house, an addition onto my house. I mean, actually my sister's house. I unfortunately missed out on that. And then you know what he did? He built lighthouses. He built little lighthouses out of plywood. They'd be, like 8-foot tall lighthouses out of, 2x4s and plywood, and would give them. He gave one to his neighbor, gave one to his church. He couldn't stop working. I however, can totally imagine myself just playing video games for 30 years.
Really? Because the thing that so many people, the thing that so many people were stressing was that it's important to separate the idea of work from the idea of a job, right? That even if you don't have a job, you might be actually doing the work you really mean to be doing. And maybe that's these types of craft projects or whatever, or volunteering, or, being, a grandparent that leans in. And, I think that it is actually an extraordinary stroke of luck if what you consider to be the work you really want to be doing, other than playing video games.
I feel like that is what I want to be doing.
You can get an account on Twitch, I believe, and you can get a big career going out of that if you're good.
Yeah, I
But
feel like that is what I
it's
want to
quite
be
blessed
doing.
if you can align that with the thing that actually pays you, with the job that you go to. And then I think, you end up in that blessed place where you don't want to retire at 59,
Yeah.
62, 64, even if you're lucky.
Well, check back in with me when I'm older, and we'll see how I feel. But I got gambling debts, so I'm going to work until I die. All right, let's talk about the riots that are likely upcoming where I live, Washington D.C. Uh, Donald Trump might be indicted by the time this podcast airs. We are, as we record this, in this waiting period. It looks like he's probably going to be indicted, but no charges have been passed down yet. Trump, of course, is calling for riots in the streets. Now, I need to know if that's going to happen because I live real close to the Capitol. So I just need to know, hey, can I go to Chipotle, or is there going to be an insurrection outside? Because if it's the latter, I'm going to do DoorDash. Um, but what do you? So I feel I have really mixed feelings about this possible Trump indictment. Really mixed feelings. I feel that there are two extremely important principles here. One principle is that nobody's above the law, including the president. Nobody's above the law. He's guilty of a crime. You charge him, you try him, just as you would anyone else. The second principle is that you need to be very, very, very careful about charging, trying, convicting, and jailing political figures, because, of course, that is how every dictatorship does it. They go, oh, my God, this guy's got so many parking tickets. He has to go to jail for 30 years and can't run against me. And I mean, that's certainly part of Vladimir Putin's playbook. Name just about any strong man or strong woman, strong person.
Don't shield them from criticism. Don't shield them from criticism.
I won't. Because I respect women, I am acknowledging that they can be just as awful and dictatorial as men. And any dictator, female or male, who wants to get rid of their opponents, take them off the board, takes them off with criminal charges. So those are the two competing principles here. I really struggle to know what to think about this. What are your thoughts on where we are with Trump right now?
Well, there's nothing new under the sun. There's no new comment about Donald Trump, but I think, I'm not the first to observe. He's just committed so many crimes. Like, obviously, there's so much out there that, it's not quite the equivalent of like the dude in Russia who gets thrown in jail for the parking tickets because they had to cook that up. It's like Donald Trump could, in a fair society, have been arrested for like any number of things. This one that they're getting on, they're trying to get him on. What concerns me about it is that it's kind of weak, right? The man has been impeached twice for serious stuff. This is the man who was trying to extort Zelensky before that name became world famous. That was why he was impeached. I mean, this man, his violations go
which
deep.
many people consider the weaker of the two impeachments.
You feel him? The violations go deep, but here we are. We're in a situation where, it's coming down to paying hush money to an adult performer. And as Damon Linker on his Substack, his very good Substack, timestamp that real quick so I could, notes from the middle ground. On Damon Linker's very good Substack, notes from the middle ground, he's observing that, paying hush money in itself is not illegal. We'll do a pause there. I'm going to read from that.
Okay. Mark. I marked one edit because you took another run at that, so we've got two edits right now.
So as Damon Linker on his very good Substack, notes from the middle ground, notes, paying hush money isn't itself illegal. So the DA will need to charge Trump with violations of campaign finance law, treating the payoff as an unreported in-kind contribution to his own presidential campaign, or with misdemeanors or felonies involving improper business filings connected to covering up the payment, which was made through his lawyer and personal fixer, Michael Cohen, who has already been convicted for related crimes. So you're already getting to this type of situation where more than half of Americans don't give a fuck. I'm sorry. They're not gonna find that to be worth throwing the leading candidate for president in the 2024 election in prison. That's going to smell wrong. It's not going to pass the smell test. I mean, it's going to be like calling a travel if we want to get back to what is really wrong in America, it's gonna be like calling a
Mhm.
travel on the game-winning
Traveling in the
shot.
NBA, yeah.
And there's traveling going on a lot, but there is a lot of traveling going on. But you can't call that in certain situations because the fans aren't going to accept it. And the American public would find this to be. I think it would backfire. Does that sound right to you?
I certainly agree that as far as like what this will mean politically is nothing whatsoever. This is not going to get people up in arms. Nobody's opinion about Donald Trump is going to change based on this. I mean, you either already hated him or you already loved him. I agree that so if you like look back to Watergate, there was sort of revelation after revelation after revelation. Oh my God, Nixon had a dirty tricks campaign. Oh my God, he had the plumbers. Oh my God, he had a secret
Mhm.
recording system. Oh my God, he fired the special prosecutor. Oh my, it was just thing after thing after thing. I think people who dislike Trump, and I am obviously certainly among them, keep kind of hoping something like that will happen. This is absolutely not that thing. This is not the thing that is going to make Joe Blow on the street go, oh my God, I can't believe it. Because the charges, which, and there aren't presently charges, but it looks like the charges are going to be things like falsifying business records. Are people going to get up in arms about falsifying business records? Absolutely not. Now, let me say, that doesn't mean you shouldn't bring the charges, because the standard is not, is this going to move the needle politically? That is absolutely not what you should be paying attention to. You should be paying attention to, is this a good case? Is this a solid case? Like I said, nobody's above the law. You've got to try to be as clear as possible. But there are a couple things that bother me here. Let me run through them quickly. Number one, probably the best proxy for what happened was John Edwards, because John Edwards also paid off. This is a similar situation. Hush money to cover up an affair, and he was at the time a presidential candidate. That was different than what Trump did, because he was using campaign funds to pay the person. What Trump has done is used private funds for a campaign purpose. John Edwards was not convicted of that. I believe he was acquitted of some charges, and then others were dropped, is my memory. I please Google that to make sure I'm correct. But I'm correct that he was not convicted of any of that. So the closest proxy we have did not result in a conviction. That's the first thing that bothers me. The second thing that bothers me is I know that campaign finance laws are notoriously fuzzy, because there's this question of, is money being used for a campaign purpose? Okay, so if the candidate gets a haircut, is that a campaign purpose? Because he's got to look good on the campaign, right? But that's also just a thing you do in regular life.
If the candidate wears a tax the rich dress to the Met Gala and doesn't pay for any
as
of her
Bernie
hair,
Sanders famously did,
is that campaign finance violation?
It's many of these things exist in a gray area. I think no, because she was not running a campaign at the time. Although if you're a House member, you're always running a campaign. I don't know about that.
Yeah, something was definitely that didn't pass the smell test either, apparently. But
the whole attending the Met Gala, what are the ethics of that? But that's for another podcast. That sounds like the Abuse Bullshit top thing that doesn't matter. But yes, it's all very fuzzy. The line is extremely blurry. So these charges would have to solve that fuzziness, and that sounds like a tall order to me. And the third thing that bothers me is the prosecutor, I assume when the charges come out, if they come out, if they haven't come out yet, is going to be prosecuting a state law with regards to a federal election. And it's not clear that you can do that. Let me read from the New York Times. It says, a New York Times review and interviews with election law experts strongly suggest that New York state prosecutors have never before filed an election law case involving a federal campaign. Bringing an untested case against anyone, let alone a former president of the United States, carries the risk that a court could throw out or narrow the case. Thomas, I am but a joke elf. I am not a lawyer. I am the farthest thing from a prosecutor you could possibly be. But Jesus, this doesn't sound like a slam dunk to me. And I feel like if you're going to bring charges against a presidential candidate, a serious presidential candidate, much as that may depress me, it should be a real slam dunk. And it doesn't sound
100%.
like it.
Yeah, I think the damage that can be done from taking a swing and missing again.
Ugh.
I'm not sure that. I mean, I'm not sure that people would take to the streets the way that. I mean, it's interesting to see.
Good, because they're my
To
streets.
see if Trump actually take it to your streets. Yeah.
Yeah, I
People-
know. That's when it gets real. That's when I care.
It's interesting to see if he has already lost some of that pull. Not 100% sure. People were into his midterm endorsements that were all about the candidates who stressed "Stop the Steal." It seems that there is some fatigue of that, and I wonder if there is the potential that you take this swing and he doesn't actually have all that support, and it's kind of showing himself to be no longer having clothes. I wonder. I mean, it's hard to know, but I wouldn't. Feels like a risky gamble to take.
Well, thank you for putting the image of naked Donald Trump in all of our heads, Thomas.
You already had that.
I hope you don't know that. You don't know that. I've been of the opinion for about a year now that DeSantis is the front runner for the Republican nomination, not Trump. It's my TV instincts are guiding me on that, at least as much as my political instincts. I feel like people are tired of the Trump show and they don't want to get it renewed. Watch this be the thing that revives Trump's political career. Watch this put him front and center. It'll make him a martyr. It'll be an us versus them thing, or rally around the flag. Look what the terrible Democrats are doing. My God, I don't know. I'm catastrophizing. That's the worst case scenario.
But also, I mean, it's true. I mean, it puts DeSantis, though, it would potentially revive Trump. It puts DeSantis in an awkward position. He'd have to choose between authorizing an arrest warrant for Mr. Trump, whose home is in Florida, or attempting in some way to aid his Republican rival and possibly face legal action himself as a result. So it puts him in a real bind. So if he's the guy to potentially take down Trump, doing this kind of ill-conceived prosecution of Trump over hush money, essentially, actually could end up kneecapping the one guy that could stave off this Trump threat. So it seems like it could be, even if it works, it could be a Pyrrhic victory. I mean, but yeah. We're back to wondering whether, it's better or worse to have Trump or DeSantis. The jury's not. I still think
talked about this last week.
I still stay with where I was last time, that you have to go with anything but Trump.
Yeah, that's basically where I am. I don't presently like saying DeSantis is better than Trump, because I think DeSantis is still a bit of a question mark. The way I phrased it last week is, anyone who follows the basic rules of the game is better than Trump. So that means the basic rules of liberalism, and the biggest part of that is conceding when you lose an election. If the other person wins, the other person wins. We know Trump will not do that. If DeSantis does that, anything else, I might dislike him in a million other ways, but even that would be better than Trump. Trump is uniquely bad. Also, another thing I should add, Trump is just a moron. And with all this banking stuff that's been going on the last 2 weeks, I'm just glad we have a competent president, a competent administration. I personally think they've been doing a pretty good job. That is the type of issue where it's not really an ideological issue. It's more of just knowledge and having a cool head, synthesizing information, making a decision. That is not Trump's forte. I think basic competence is an important thing, and Trump sure as hell doesn't have it.
Right. But then what if you're really, really competent at making all of your state's politics about, like, banning DEI?
Should we move on to that?
Sure. I mean, because that's one thing that DeSantis has proven himself really competent and really persistent at.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I hedge what I'm willing to say about DeSantis at this point, because his record on free speech and letting people say what they think is extraordinarily crappy. It's unbelievable that he's become this. Yeah, he's become this culture warrior where he just goes through a list of culture war issues like, what have I done on that? What have I done on that? What have I done on that? Which you think, given the left's proclivity to censor people these days, might lead you to be Joe free speech, but he's not, because he just tries to limit people in other ways. And what he's done this week, or this is actually the Florida State House advanced a bill. This is from CBS News. Advanced a bill that would ban state colleges and universities from using funds to, quote, promote, support, or maintain any programs or campus activities that espouse diversity, equity, or inclusion, DEI, or critical race theory rhetoric, end quote. What does that mean? It's incredibly vague, which is the point, right? It's going to leave college professors in a constant situation where they're asking themselves, can I say this? Is this legal? If it passed, which it is not yet.
Right. And this is from the Florida House of Representatives, so it's not coming from DeSantis' desk per se, but we'll see what his response to the bill is. I mean, it's so vague that it has, I don't even know how to judge this, but it has, Black sororities and fraternities in Florida wondering if they'll be able to continue operating under such a law. I mean, it just sows a kind of uncertainty that I think is certainly not helpful to making big, pluralistic, multi-ethnic states and societies work better than they do now. I mean, it seems that the fundamental thing you get from this is more division, more suspicion. You get tweets from anti-racist activists like one that I saw, like Ibram X. Kendi, where, the response is kind of, and I guess that takes us into my second Twitter
fight.
Fight of the week.
We aired by starting a segment that says Thomas's Twitter fight of the week, because there are going to be multiple Twitter fights many weeks, aren't there? So, why don't you take us through your second Twitter fight of the week?
I don't, these battles, like they come, Twitter, it comes to me, I was just trying to make a simple point, hear me out. I was just trying to make a simple point, which is that
I'll hear you out.
This bill sucks. I don't like these bills. But, there's they inspire a kind of hyperbole too, that I don't think is going to get us towards that multi-ethnic society that works better either. So Ibram X. Kendi tweeted, quote, Republican politicians in Florida oppose diversity. They oppose equity. They oppose inclusion, which is to say they support, quote, whites only, and inequity and exclusion, the racism of it all. So I hate these bills, but it doesn't follow that from these crappy, confusing bills that we're back in Jim Crow in whites only spaces. In fact, the toothpaste is out of the container. A state like Florida is so diverse already that you're never getting whites only spaces, no matter what type of legislation you pass. I mean, you're not getting white only bodies in Florida. I mean, people are mixed all types of ways. Society is more complicated than that. These are terrible bills. There is some
Bell and Sebastian concert might do it, but short of that,
are they
I agree.
Man,
I don't even know if they're still together. But yeah, short of that, hard to find any all-white spaces.
I mean, racism is not equivalent to whites only. I mean, you can have racism without Jim Crow segregated, my dad's childhood 2 water fountains. I mean, that is not actually what this movement is actually doing. And I think that, you don't actually oppose something as nefarious as this type of anti-DEI legislative movement that DeSantis is orchestrating. You don't actually oppose that effectively by crying wolf in such a way that it overstates the threat. I think you have to be very clear-eyed about exactly what the problem is so that you can oppose it effectively, as opposed to making a kind of boogeyman that will take people back to, Florida 1945.
Yeah, I agree. I feel that he has managed to overstate a thing that is nonetheless bad, which is always, I'm always frustrated when that happens, because if something is bad, argue against it and explain why it's bad. When you overstate, then number one, you give your opponents something to latch onto. They can just latch on the overstatement. Number two, you cause reasonable people to go, well, that's not true, is it? Like I was with you up until then. And he has kind of done that, because you're right. Even if this bill happened, and I agree, this is a very bad bill. College, for the millionth time, college is a place to hear all sorts of ideas and have your thoughts challenged and hear things coming from all points of the political spectrum, all sorts of philosophical traditions. Many you will think are garbage. That is your right, but that's what happens in college. And I really, really, really don't like state legislatures and governors dictating what, and not the broad strokes, but I mean down to a fine level of detail what's taught in college. I'm really not comfortable with that. So bad bill. If it happened, it would be real bad. And yet, it would not
be Jim Crow. It would still not be Jim Crow.
Would not come back.
And I think it's really important to respect that distinction. And so, I went a step further in my tweet, and I just mentioned, I don't like these bills either, but they're not whites only. And, the chief instigator of this movement, a guy called Chris Rufo, who's been advising on all this stuff and has kind of cynically, made this his raison d'etre, I guess, to find.
So much French in the pod today.
There's a lot of French. I'm in Paris right now. But he made this his raison d'etre to oppose wokeness, to oppose DEI.
Every 10 minutes, Thomas just pipes up, I'm in Paris right now.
It's late out here. I mentioned, the instigator of this movement, Chris Rufo, he himself is in an interracial marriage. So you're not going to, unless you have a different conception of Jim Crow than I do, you're not going to have whites only rooms with a bunch of guys with their non-white wives and non-white children sitting around enforcing white-only spaces. I mean, it's just a weird thing to do. That is where the kind of the Twitter beef came in, because then I had to get subjected to so many lectures on how the biggest racists in the world love to have black wives or Asian wives or what have you. That's a mark of how racist you are, is that you marry. It doesn't necessarily track with my personal experience. I know Strom Thurmond, Thomas Jefferson, lots of people, they didn't necessarily marry these people.
But Strom Thurmond didn't have a black wife.
No.
He had several children by a black woman whom he did not marry.
But that's the point at which the tweet went off the rails, because the whole thing became, that's not how racism works. Racists love to have non-white partners, apparently, and children. So I'm still wrapping my head around this. I was lectured that this was this is the history of slavery. I mean, it's not exactly what I'm thinking. I mean, I don't like Chris Rufo, but I don't think it's exactly what he's doing. I don't think he's in a Strom Thurmond position.
I don't. Right, two things. Number one, ask your dad, because he's an old guy and a black guy. Maybe he can tell us, is that how Jim Crow people were doing it back in the day?
Interracial marriage? No,
that's not my perception.
No,
I'm from the South. It was a different era, but the older folks, interracial relationships, real thin on the ground, to say the least, where I was. Maybe he knows better than I do.
No, but probably I was told that, of course, literally, it's not whites only, but it's more subtle now. And I think that misunderstands what the actual problem is. I think that when you slap everything with the label racist, and real racism that really hates gets lumped in with racism that merely, I guess, harms, and maybe harms as the result of other objectives. I think that they have objectives with some of these bills that are not fundamentally to do what exactly their critics think. Then I think you just obscure the conversation to the point where it's, judgment requires making distinctions. Moral judgment requires making distinctions. You really have to be able to say that this thing here is truly racism. This is white supremacy. This is Jim Crow. We have to. These are things that have to be differentiated from each other.
It's really lobbing a grenade, isn't it? When you call someone a racist, it's a big charge. It's going to be real hard to have dialogue after that, which is that's the other thing I wanted to get to. I think we call people, and I mean we on the left, which I am, we call people racist too much. We just do it at the drop of a hat. It's tricky because you do want to call racism out, right? When you see something, say something.
Of course. Yeah, of course.
But we levy it. We levy it so frequently. It's just a cudgel that we try to hit our opponents with so frequently. I don't think it's conducive to a good political atmosphere or grounds for debate if you call everything racist or, sexist, homophobic, whatever it might be. I think you're better off giving your political opponents a bit of the benefit of the doubt. I think I can say to a guy like Chris Rufo, Ron DeSantis, I oppose this bill. I think this is a real bad bill. I think you are creating a climate of fear in colleges. I think you are inserting the state where it doesn't belong. I think this is a bad idea. I oppose this bill. I think you can make that argument and not go the next step and say, and you are a racist, and you are a bigot.
Because it also misunderstands what is so appealing about some of what they're doing to large swaths of voters, not all of whom are white, because DEI is not synonymous with black people, actually. DEI is not synonymous. No, it's not.
God,
a lot of non-white people, including people. Yes, it's a kind of elite white
people.
Let's be honest. A lot of non-white people, including black people, are not on board with all of the DEI prerogatives. So to just blanket any opposition to DEI as racism, anti-black racism, is already not interpreting your opponent's motives in ways that might track with the complexity of the political moment right now. It might not even take into effect just what real political instincts tell people to do in the situation where something like that is so unpopular with most Americans. You don't have to be racist to realize that a lot of voters don't like having to take loyalty oaths when they start a new job.
Yeah. Well, and I always think it's interesting. One of the strongest affirmative responses you will get to a poll is, it always has to do with, political correctness. And, are you afraid that you might say the wrong thing? People of all races answer yes to that one in big numbers, 80, 90%. Any race, any demographic, income, whatever. Just because everyone's afraid of saying the wrong thing, everyone's afraid of doing the wrong thing. It is, as you said, it's not correct to assume that DEI equals the opinions of black people or the opinions of non-white people. It's a lot more complex.
It's a lot more complicated than that. So I think you could have spaces to say it is the equivalent of whites only. It really disappoints me because I don't like this stuff at all. I don't think you legislate ideas that you don't like away, but I think you could banish DEI and you could have lots of integrated spaces left over with a lot of people who are not white wanting to be there with no DEI. So let's be real.
Yeah. But I would say let's not ban DEI and keep the integrated spaces. That would be.
I agree. I mean, because
I don't know.
You don't.
I don't even know what that
things.
means. I don't know what that means. I ban critical race theory. I don't know what that means. What are the borders of that?
Either. And so it ends up doing real harm. It ends up making it so a teacher's afraid to teach Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail because they're not certain if that violates the new legislation or not. I mean, that's a pedagogical tragedy if you can't be certain whether you can or cannot teach Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, what country is that?
South Africa 30 years ago?
What's that?
I said South Africa 30 years ago?
Man.
Maybe that's the country that is, but that's not a country we should be emulating. Hey, speaking of academia and weird stuff happening in academia, let's touch on this profile in the New Yorker by Rachel Aviv on the philosopher, more French, Agnes Callard. I mean, she's American, but that's a French
She's
last
American,
name,
so
right?
yeah, I
Agnes.
think you've got a pretty good pronunciation on it.
I gave it the old college try. Why don't you take us through this one? Because this article was bananas.
So this article was bananas. So Agnes Callard is like, she's a philosopher, pretty distinguished. She's at the University of Chicago. She writes.
Where I went to grad school.
Where you went to grad school. You got
Yeah,
all
I'm
the
on her
alma
side.
maters.
I'm taking her side automatically.
So, she pops up in a lot of publications I like to read. She's in the New York Times. Sometimes she writes sometimes really interesting stuff in Harper's. She had a piece a couple of years ago or last year in Harper's on jealousy, about having an affair. And all of her action always takes place at academic conferences that professors travel to. That's the world that she moves in. Academic
Are those
conferences.
fuck fests?
Apparently,
Thomas, are
they can be.
conferences fuck fests? They can be. Wow.
I mean, I'm not. That's not my world. I'm a writer.
Yeah,
I'm a freelance writer.
You're married with kids, but you're also kind of French.
Man, maybe that's why I'm not at the academic conferences. I don't get invited to those. But
for the sake of your marriage, I assume you do not partake.
In what? In the conferences?
No, in the fuck fest. In the fuck fest afterwards.
Oh man, you're trying to get me canceled up in here.
I am trying to get you. Thomas, for the record, Thomas has never been known to partake in a philosophy conference fuck fest. Okay, count him out. 6 p.m. He's in his room watching Sports Center. Okay,
watching the rioting outside my window. Watching the riots outside my window.
Yeah, right. Okay, I got us way off track. Continue with your story of philosophy and fuckfests.
So she can be an interesting writer. I thought her piece on jealousy in Harper's a year ago or so was really phenomenal about having an affair with a married man, and she's extraordinarily candid, almost to a degree that you can't believe. I mean, I think the first time I ever became aware of her was in the summer of 2020. After we published the Harper's letter and Twitter was a pretty lively place, she just responded to a tweet thread that Yasha Monk was writing, and she popped in to say, I gave myself a philosophical experiment. Who, based on these tweets in this thread, would I want to date just based on the tweets? And it wouldn't be Yasha, it wouldn't be Thomas. It's this other girl, and it's just popped out of nowhere. It's like, who is this?
She offered this. She instigated this.
She instigated out of nowhere.
Okay, so she popped up to call you and Yasha Monk unfuckable. Am I interpreting that right?
And that she would even change her orientation to avoid, based on our tweets.
Just the two of you. The two of you. Okay, yeah. Burn. Yeah.
Bad tweeting. Okay. That's the theme. But then I was like, that's an interesting philosopher. And so Rachel Aviv, who's a really talented writer at the New Yorker, has this profile on her that is a kind of perplexing profile because it's not clear what justifies the profile. It doesn't really delve into Callard's work very deeply. It's really about the kind of love triangle they're the Polycule she set up for herself with her unbelievably cool seeming ex-husband and the grad student and scholar of Aristotle from the University of Chicago that she's fallen in love with and moved into her home with her ex-husband and their children. And so
yes, her ex-husband does seem to be the most chill dude in the world because he is presently living with his ex-wife, her, and her current husband, boyfriend,
and their child. That he's helping raise their child as well as.
You know what I kept thinking when I was reading this? I was like, I bet it's a real nice house. in Hyde Park, and you don't just give that up, If you got 3,500 square feet in Hyde Park, you might just live with your wife and her new husband and their family. Because it's good housing is hard to come by in that part of town.
It's rough out there. Yeah. I want to read a little passage that really jumped out to me, to give you a
Please.
sense of the way Callard's mind works. For Christmas last year, Agnes and Arnold, the grad student that she ended up marrying after Ben, her first husband. For Christmas last year, Agnes and Arnold and the 3 children went to Pennsylvania to visit his family. Agnes couldn't stop coughing and sneezing. About a week earlier, she'd had a severe allergy attack brought on by a cat, and the symptoms hadn't subsided. One night, she was making pita bread, coughing every few minutes, and Arnold was sitting at a table in the kitchen, grading papers on his laptop. They were sharing the same space, but Agnes felt as if they were in 2 separate worlds. She was reminded of a line from the Icelandic novel Independent People by Halldór Laxness, which she had just read. 2 human beings have such difficulty in understanding each other. There is nothing so tragical as 2 human beings. The next day, when I visited Agnes and Arnold at his parents' house, she told him that while making the pita, she had felt as if they were out of sync. She wished he had put down his laptop and talked to her. She was aware that something more purposeful could be happening, and the lack felt tragic. He's not paying attention to what I want him to pay attention to, she said of that moment. He's not interested in what I want him to be interested in. She recognized that he had to grade papers, but she was still annoyed. I'm like, why didn't he do the grading earlier today? She said. I bet there was lots of times today when he was wasting time. That's probably true, Arnold said. We sat at the kitchen table, and he dipped the pita into hummus he had just blended. The boys, their children, were all at the mall with his parents. Also, the thing with the coughing and the sneezing is funny because you're clearly suffering in a pretty serious way, he told Agnes, and you have been for days. And at this point, I've just faded it out. I just don't hear it anymore. Agnes said that in moments of disconnection, she repeats a little mantra to herself. It's fine. You can do this on your own. You can figure things out on your own. But she knows it's a lie. I almost have a feeling of pleasure, like a sick pleasure, as I placate myself with the thought, she told me. So this profile is strange, man. This profile.
You think? You think? Strange seems apt. Strange seems apt. That as you were reading that, I think it brought it back to French cinema, because that you may have just described the only scene too boring to be described by a French film auteur. The pita bread scene would get cut out of any movie at Cannes. That is entirely too much nuance, I think.
So Rachel Aviv is kind of a masterful writer because she's taking you inside the mind of essentially like a solipsist, it's quite incredible. She becomes quite disillusioned when she realizes that, just what most people realize in dating, which is that you meet somebody, you're really into them, and then the longer you're with them, like the passion fades a little bit and real life starts and they got to grade papers and you can't actually be one mind. And she says at points in the piece that she wants to get to the point where you can be one mind with somebody else. And it's kind of an incredible piece. I mean, you don't really understand why you're reading this other than this is someone living in a polycule in a very strange way. I mean, I still don't have a sense of what her professional philosophy really is.
Yeah, that was the thing that kind of baffled me about the article. And you're right that it was interesting. It certainly was interesting. It is interesting to hear the pita bread story from the perspective of the person who is having a crisis because their partner is not paying rapt attention to them making pita bread. That's interesting, but
all the things to be rebuked for, that's tough.
I mean, the main thing I took from this article is that I should never date Agnes Callard just because I cannot give her that type of attention. I mean, I struggle to remember my wife's birthday and stuff. So if I need to be of one mind with her when she's making pita bread, I'm just going to fail that test and get kicked out of their presumably lovely home in Hyde Park. But I was reading the article.
If you tweet a certain way, she's going to preemptively exclude you from her list of potential polycule partners.
I am in the friend zone probably already with you and Yasha Monk. But yeah. I did kind of read this article wondering, why is this article? Why is this article in the New Yorker? Is it just to recount all the ways in which her living situation is unusual. And that's where I kind of did start to have an opinion. For the record, whatever her unusual living situation is, Godspeed. She wants to live in a polycule. Her ex-husband wants to live in the house with the wife's new family. Whatevs. Good on ya. It's like there was maybe a little bit, and I know maybe this is more in people's reaction to it than in what Rachel Aviv wrote, but there was a certain amount of like, whoa, get a gander at this lady's weird sex life.
Right.
I feel if it's consenting adults, good luck with your weird sex life. Have fun, Professor.
It's like weird, not even sex life. It's like weird co-parenting life, you know? In a way, kind of, I guess I enjoyed this article more than some of my friends who were deeply frustrated with it and just thought it was an extraordinary waste of space in the New Yorker. but I actually kind of liked it, maybe because of the phase of life I'm in, but it was a real argument for how just being flexible and kind of chill and understanding actually is an amazing way to move through the world and probably saves you a lot of pain. Like the dude that comes off looking like unflappable is the ex-husband. You don't even know if he's dating right now. He probably is. He's chilling.
He might be, his dating prospects might have improved dramatically since the article, because there might be women looking at him and thinking, I want to be with a dude that chill.
There might not be room in the house, but I'm going to try to get him. I'm going to try to get with this dude. I don't know where I'll fit in this house, but no, it's amazing. I mean, he just rolls with it. At one point they're doing, a live philosophy debate at the University of Chicago, him and her after they're divorced, and she's living with the grad student, and they're debating the subject of divorce, and she makes it increasingly personal, and he just stays on this high level of dissociating however he personally feels about the issue and just engaging what interests her. It's like he comes across as like an extraordinary generous dude. And a kind of model of how, happiness or flexibility is a way of not just protecting other people, but protecting yourself. Although, another reading on it is that he's totally cucked in this situation, and he's quite a tragic figure. You know what I'm saying?
One of the two. Either he's ascended to a higher philosophical plane, or he's totally cucked. It's definitely one of those two, though.
I found the article interesting. On that light note, I don't know. Have we beat that one to death?
Yeah, I think so. Last thing I want to say on it, just because I want to push people towards this sketch, it reminded me of an SNL sketch, which is on YouTube, called Funny New Comedy. It's got Tom Hanks in it. It's just, I don't want to over describe it, but this article really, really reminded me of that sketch, which I think is a great sketch about the state of comedy these days on TV. So there, now we've beat it to death. This episode, I'll go ahead and say it was too French. It was a little too French for my taste. Some is good. This was too much, I think. So we'll try to next week. Yeah, you're going to be in New York next week?
Yeah.
That's a good start. Usually the trash and rioting in New York is marginally lower than Paris.
Yeah, it's at an even keel. It doesn't spike up and down as much.
Exactly. Okay, well then I look forward to having you back stateside, and have a good week. Bye.